welcome to Why Are You Laughing at Me with Gherkin Picklewater. Today, my guest is Joshua Grannell, a actor, filmmaker, podcaster. He is the performer behind the international drag sensation Peaches Christ. He is an all-around amazing person and comedian, and we're glad to have him here. Joshua, can you tell the people a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm definitely best known as Peaches Christ. That's a much more recognizable name than Joshua Grinnell. But the person behind Peaches, myself, I do a lot of different things. I like to juggle. So I grew up one of those kids who knew I wanted to do show business. I wanted to make movies. I wanted to be on stage. I wanted to have a haunted house. I wanted to, all this stuff. And so I'm basically an adult version of what I wanted to be as a kid, which is a clown, a performer, a writer, a director, a storyteller. And so I kind of juggle a lot of different things all at the same time. And that's what's always worked for me.
That's amazing. And you got to do so many of the things that you wanted to do as a kid, including the haunted house, which is
Yeah.
really great. Um, Speaking of childhood, is that when did funny start for you? When did you first start finding humor as a tool?
I mean, I think for me, and actually asking my parents, because they get asked these sorts of questions enough that I kind of go to the source, the people who actually might be able to remember. And my parents say that I've like always been like this since the time I had, that at the point where a kid, becomes a toddler and then they start to become like a person, like a little boy, little girl, or little something in between, which is pretty much what I was. They knew I was queer. They knew I was funny. They knew I was flamboyant, and they knew I was really into anything spooky, dark, macabre, anything kind of, horror. And for me, my interest in horror has always been connected to my sense of humor because I don't enjoy humorless horror. I don't enjoy humorless anything almost. So my genre fandom and cult movie fandom is interconnected with my interest in comedy.
So what is it that you find funny?
That's a good question. I find people funny. I find life funny, and I find the relatable, silly, um, weird bullshit of life kind of, maybe some of the funniest stuff to me is what's considered the most normal, quote unquote. I find my biggest idol as far as a storyteller or a comedy filmmaker would have to be John Waters. And I think, what John does so well is actually just sort of shines a light on what we accept as sort of straight society or normal society, which sounds strange because he made all these movies about these outrageous freaks. But when you really look at things like Polyester or Hairspray or Serial Mommer, even Pink Flamingos, most of what's super funny about it is the stuff that's relatable. Like, oh, I could imagine that woman saying that because I know a woman like that. So I guess I find people funny, and I find sort of, what's all around us to be funny. And often maybe it's things that maybe the mainstream don't necessarily find funny. That might be part of my identification as an outsider. So I don't know. Yeah, that's weird. I never thought that's a good question. I've never been asked that.
Um, you mentioned John Waters. Who are some of your other icons, your other, people that you strive towards their level?
Well, I think of Peaches Christ in the creation of Peaches Christ as being born out of Joshua's fandom of certain things. So it's a very, when we get into the psychology of it all, I think when I first started doing the character of Peaches, I used to think, oh, this is a totally different character than me, and I'm inventing this other persona. And then as the decades wore on, I started to realize Oh, Peaches is Joshua, and Joshua is Peaches, and this isn't really just some persona. It's more of an unlocked channel of creativity. And Peaches, I'm actually quite shy and introverted, so if I'm not doing a podcast like this, or I'm not on stage and turned on as a talker, I'm the kind of person who'll go to a party and just want to stand in the corner and observe. And, that's kind of my default. Whereas a lot of my drag queen friends, they, enjoy being the center of attention all the time. And so Peaches for me was a way for me to kind of give license to Joshua to be bigger, to be funnier, to be crazier, to be wilder. But ultimately, it is just another version of what's already inside of me, if that makes sense. And my biggest inspirations as a kid, the things I think about when I think about what led me to drag, are really there's like a holy trilogy. um, Elvira was probably the first funny drag performer I discovered. I didn't know it was drag at the time. It took me many, many years, until working with her later and meeting her and eventually asking her to be my drag mother, to realize that women, do drag. And Elvira was my first real exposure to a drag performer. What's interesting about Elvira is, of course, you find out um, after being a fan of hers for so long, or I found out the whole character was put together by her and her drag queen friends and her gay male friends, and there's a lot of drag put into the Elvira persona. Frankenfurter would be the next, Rocky Horror and the comedy of Rocky Horror, and Frankenfurter's sort of ambiguous gender representation, that sort of ugly sensuality that was so sexy. Tim Curry, in many ways, is just so not a conventional sex symbol, but like the way that Tim played the femme and the masculine and the comedy and the genius of that performance, specifically Frankenfurter played by Tim Curry, was so big for me. And then of course Divine. I grew up in Maryland, and discovering Divine and the John Waters movie. So for me, and all three of those, archetypes are funny in different ways, right? Like they're all three hilarious and genius, but very funny in different ways.
You talk about Peaches being another aspect of you, and coming from the background that I come from in clown specifically, that's a huge part of how we view the characters that we are, is just amplifications of
Hmm.
the person that you are. Um, so currently your comedy, as you put it forth, we talked about it coming from your childhood, or you being this way for as far back as people recall. Where does your comedy come from right now? What is the core of the humor that you're putting out into the world?
Wow, I can tell you what motivates me. And then maybe I'll come up with an answer. I today for a while I identified as a clown, as Peaches. There was a time when drag was not popular. When I started doing drag, it was really looked down upon, especially by the gay community, because the fight for marriage equality was in full swing, and we were seen as freaks and outsiders. So the drag queens, the leather people, trans folks, they didn't want us at the front of any pride parade. They wanted normal, family looking people. And I've always been motivated, I think, by being an underdog, by being, outsider, by being punk rock, and identifying with, in some ways, taking my anger towards things like the Catholic Church. Clearly, I grew up Catholic. I went to Catholic school. I turned the pain of that experience into Peaches Christ, into Midnight Mass, into idol worship shows. Like I am still clearly obsessed with Catholicism and the effect it had on me, and also wanting to take out the power it had over me by turning it into comedy. Essentially, when people are really upset with me, like Christians are really offended, I always turn it back and go, I am doing nothing more than taking something that was used to hurt me, and I'm using it to entertain people and make people laugh. Like that is my main goal. And so over time I realized it was less about being angry in punk rock the way it was when I started, and now it's more about wanting people to come to a show that I do, or see a movie that I make, or whatever it is. And I love the idea that I can provide, maybe for 60, 90 minutes, some sort of escape from the shit show of life that we're all, dealing with. And it is a shit show these days. It's like so bleak, and we're inundated with it because we have access to all this media, and it is just stressor after stressor after stressor, with all the wars and the unjust, stuff that's happening around the world, and then our own, elections, and then just all the shit. And I kind of feel like right now I just want to make people laugh and kind of forget um about all that stuff. So that's kind of what motivates me. And then what do I think is funny? I don't know. I guess as far as where I get inspiration from, that is such a good question. I don't know. I like, I like being absurd, but obviously, comedy is best when it's relatable. So yeah, I don't know. It's funny. I think about what do I think would make the audience laugh, and that's what I go for.
I'm very much a what would make me laugh versus make the audience laugh. I think there are two very definitive perspectives to have.
Yes,
I don't know of a third one. I just know there are those two perspectives. What's going to make them laugh or what's going to make me laugh.
that
And
makes sense. Yeah.
but
Well,
I
one of the thing, yeah, just to jump in, I think one of the things that happened with me is it was kind of accidental, where because I loved cult movies so much, I created an event where I could post basically dive into my drag interest and improv theater sketch comedy interest. I wasn't doing lip syncs at midnight mass. We were doing sketch comedy shows and improv, and staging absurd, contests, mother daughter mud wrestling. It was all comedic theater on like this epic scale. So I was doing that while also leading into this other obsession of mine, which was cult movies and movie exhibition. And what ended up happening was I started to create shows for cult audiences. And so my mindset now is I'm this cult leader, and I have to tap into what do they love? What's their value system? What when they have a sense of fellowship at my shows, what collectively is the inside joke? So it's an interesting thing, the difference
yeah.
between that, because I love what you do, but I kind of accidentally was put in this position, not so much with Terror Vault and some of the other things, or even the movies, but when I'm doing one of my typical Peaches events, I'm basically writing a show for a cult audience, and I'm writing it for them.
And you're helping. So I see comedy, and we're getting a little bit in the weeds here, but that's what this
Yeah.
podcast is for. One way to view the process that's taking place when people are laughing at something that you're putting forward is from a kind of animalistic level in which you are voluntarily transgressing against society in some way. You're
Hmm.
saying, I'm doing or saying or pointing out something that is not normally acceptable. And you as a group are going to judge me for that in some way that makes you feel stronger. You're going to bark and bare your teeth. You're going to smile and laugh. You're going to point out this transgression. And by doing that as a group, it gives you unity. It gives you a sense of community, of belonging together. And I think personally, I think that has a lot to do with how comedy works. But I know a lot of people see that as a very dark perspective and interpretation. Um, I want to talk a little bit about drag. So where did you start with drag? I know Jizz Mopper is I understand where Peaches came from in the first place, but can you talk a little bit about the origin of Peaches and how aesthetics affect your comedy?
Sure. Well, Jizz Mopper was my senior thesis film, and it was not very well embraced by Penn State University faculty at the time I made it, which was the earlier mid 90s. And there was a drag queen character that was written into the script, and when the actor who was cast to play that character wasn't showing up to shoot the movie, I ended up stepping in and playing the part. But in a way, I feel like I probably wrote the part, for myself anyway. Like I don't think it wasn't like they had to put a gun to my head to put on the wig and jump in front of the camera. And so it's a strange entrance into the world of drag, because typically your first time in drag isn't in a movie, which it just happens to be what my first time in drag was forever fucking captured on 16 millimeter film. And so aesthetically, I'm what you would call a booger. We call ugly drag queens boogers. And I'm definitely a booger. I'm definitely young, and I'm definitely clueless. And the thing that translates though is the comedy, because the script was funny. The character of Peaches in the movie is over the top and silly and fun, and it worked, and people enjoyed it. And then for the sort of promo of the film at the student film festival, I would get into drag, and we would do stuff like walk around campus at Penn State in central Pennsylvania in the mid 90s, and it was super shocking to people, and I loved the reaction I would get, from being in drag. And my drag aesthetic I've never thought of Peaches as being a woman, and I've not thought of Peaches as being a man. I've always thought of Peaches being some sort of almost like a cartoon character, or something that's larger than life, almost like I like the sort of exaggerated size. So I'll put on really big shoes with a bigger. I'm tall anyway. I'm just over 6 feet tall. I put on giant platforms, and then I have giant wigs, and I'm a big guy. So I like the exaggerated, ridiculous Godzilla, take on what this is. There are people who are female illusionists, and that is amazing, and it's its own thing. And there are drag queens who are very, very beautiful and very convincing. But that was never my thing. I was much more. I remember reading once that Divine was obsessed with, Elizabeth Taylor, and in her early days she wanted to look like Elizabeth Taylor, but then when she realized she couldn't look like Elizabeth Taylor, she and John decided to mash up their idea of beauty with Bozo the Clown. And they had Van Smith create those gigantic eyebrows, for pig flamingos that were, kind of modeled after literally Bozo the Clown. And when I read that, I thought that was so great and so exciting. And so Peaches is McDonald's arched eyebrows, which have been around since the earliest days of Peaches, are hideous and ridiculous and stupid, and no one wears makeup like that. But that's where I kind of was giving both a nod to Divine and also a nod to clowndom, and also a way for me to, the audience, except the haters online who actually go like, "You think you look like a woman? You don't." And it's like, dude, I clearly no, that I don't. I wouldn't have 17 eyebrows if I thought I was gonna look like a woman. Yeah, so it's a aesthetic that's intentionally clown-like. And then the other thing about my aesthetic is, because it's related to celebrating, my character is related to celebrating cult movies. I've always been able to take that face, which is sort of the Peaches makeup. And unlike Elvira, who has a signature wig and a signature dress that she wears all the time, or Paul Rubens, who, as Pee Wee Herman, had a red bow tie, for me, it's the eye makeup. I can pretty much morph into being a suburban housewife in Edward Scissorhands, or Pinhead, the Cenobite from Hellraiser. I can almost do anything that I'm interested in doing and make it Peaches because of those eyebrows, if that makes sense.
That's amazing. Having that kind of versatility of expression has to be really liberating as a communicator, giving you so much ability to interpret and remix and perform your performance. There you go. Perform your performance.
But don't you think it'd be so nice? Like, in some ways, I'm like, oh, I do love it, and it keeps it interesting. But then when I think about Cassandra always knowing what she's gonna wear,
Yeah.
You know, she knew exactly what wig she was going to wear and exactly what dress. Or Paul Rubens, right? Like you don't, you know exactly. So sometimes I think, oh, that's really smart when you know. And I was really into horror hosts, you know, in general as a kid. So sometimes I would question it myself and go, I'm a fucking idiot. Like I should have had one wig and one dress, you know. But hey, it's too late now. But I agree. I think I'm a, like I said, I'm a juggler of things, and I probably have some sort of attention deficit thing going on. And I think it wouldn't have worked for me to wear one look my entire career.
I get that. I again lean the opposite direction in that I pretty much always perform in the thing that you see me in, just a purple three-piece suit, because
Right.
that's my aesthetic, and that is how I want to be, dress for the job you want. And the job I want is a guy
Yeah.
who wears a purple three-piece suit every day.
There you go.
Tell me a little bit about the Terror Vault.
Yeah, the Terror Vault is well, like my first real experience as I guess what you would call like a semi-professional theater maker was running haunted houses. Well, they were really haunted trails in the woods in my neighborhood growing up as a kid. And so when I was 12, 13, 14, I would, you know, spend all year writing a script and then casting all the neighborhood kids and getting my mom would run the ticket stand and my dad would take the chain off the chainsaw and be the finale person. And this thing, the haunted trail, became like successful enough that I was written about in the paper, and we actually would sell tickets, and I had to get permission to use a bigger plot of land. And it was a really amazing experience. It was really inspiring. And I think it kind of was the first taste I had in sort of a carny lifestyle, which is what I've lived, since then. And coming back to it as an adult and creating an immersive horror show called Terror. Well, the company is called Terror Vault, and then every year I write a new show with my business partner and creative collaborator David Flower, and it's a 60-minute immersive horror show that you walk through, and kind of think of it as like a movie, but the movie's in 4D. You're going through, and you're a character in the movie. The guests are always. Last year it was called The Initiation, and we made up a whole cult, and you as the guests were being indoctrinated into this cult, and you had to do these different modules to elevate through the cult. But while you're doing it, rebels who've become suppressives and left the cult are secretly talking to you, and you're helping the rebels take down this evil leader, and he may or may not kill everybody at the end. So they're horror shows, but they're very much immersive, interactive, um, engaging, almost adventure shows and mysteries. Yeah.
That's very cool. And it's amazing that this started as something from your childhood and bled through all the way into, a successful venture as an adult. Um, well, I've just got a few more questions for you, and we'll wrap it up. Um,
Sure.
but let's go with um, actually, this is an important one. How do you deal with failure when you go up there in front of an audience and you just fall flat on your face in an unfunny way? How do you handle that? What do you do?
Well, I would tell you that failure has become my friend because in the early days of Midnight Mass, we had no money. I stopped drinking in 2002 because I, was often so crazy drunk and just so punk and wild and outrageous that shit always went wrong. Mistakes always happened. I would put my foot in my mouth, and I learned how to take these sorts of problems and roll with them in an improv, rule way. And we, over time, pretty quickly realized that the audience was with us, and that when these sorts of failures or mistakes happened, it was an opportunity to kind of turn it into comedy or a nugget of gold, and to figure out what the audience, why it didn't work, to go off script, to direct address, um, so I always like to say, like, I don't think I've ever had a flawless show. Like we never really had enough rehearsal time. Even when we do runs of shows, I'll tell you that like I've gone to London and done, oh God, I think we did 23 shows of this Drag Becomes Her parody of Death Becomes Her that I did. And of course, because you're doing it 23 times in a theater in London, the show stops having mistakes. The show was infinitely funnier at the beginning of the run when we were struggling more as drag performers and making each other laugh, or I never like faking a break. I think I don't like it. Like if we break, it is real. I will actually tell an actor if they fake a break not to do that. I hate it. But we, towards the end of the run, started to get so good that there were no mistakes, and I thought the show was not as interesting. So I actually kind of embrace failure a little bit. And then as far as a deeper level, let's say as a producer, where I lose my shirt on an event, you know, it's horrible. It's stressful. It's nightmare inducing. Like this business is not for the weak. In fact, my therapist at one point told me I've been in a business of self-induced trauma. And like it's a career of trauma. And I was like, that's dramatic. He said, no, look, a lot of people go to work 9 to 5. They know where their paycheck is coming from. They don't take their life savings and throw it into their next project. They don't live the way that you're living. They don't have countless nights of insomnia because tickets haven't sold. You've created trauma is in your DNA. So that's the kind of failure I think that maybe is harder for me to reconcile. And clearly I've gone to therapy and I'm working on it.
Wonderful. Before we wrap up, just a couple more questions. Can you tell people where they can find you online?
Sure. Peacheschrist.com, obviously, and terrorvault.com if you want to check out the Terror Vault. And then I'm on most of the social media stuff, Instagram and Facebook, but I did remove myself from X
Good on
because
you.
I just hate him so much. I mean, not that the others are much better, but oh God, it just got to the point where I was like, I can't be on this platform. I don't judge people who still are. It just was like I couldn't do it anymore. So I'm off of X.
I left it, but my wife keeps sending me things on it, so I had to go back.
Right. That's one annoying thing that when your friends share things with you and you've gotten rid of your account, you can't really
Yeah.
see it. Yeah.
Anything coming up that people should know about?
The biggest thing that I'm working on now is really just Terror Vault. I am going to Portland in a few weeks, which is so surreal and sweet. I'm getting a career achievement award from a film festival up there, and they're screening my movie All About Evil, which is a horror comedy that I made in 2010. So it's lovely that a movie that came out 14 years ago is still being screened and that people are interested. But Terror Vault is kind of all time consuming, and so that starts in October at the old San Francisco Mint building.
Wonderful. Okay, so I reached out to friends who are big drag fans, and they had one question for you, and then I've got a question for you. The question for you
Okay.
was, when are you doing Showgirls again?
I'll tell you that I was trying so hard to do before the Castro Theater closed for its renovations. And you can imagine the movie star, the just showgirl star that I was courting and I had reached out to come and do an event with me. And we got so close, but it never came to fruition. And then unfortunately, the Castro closed. So my goal is like when the Castro eventually reopens, I would love that to be my first big event as part of the reopening festivities. So hopefully apparently they're going to reopen in 2025. So hopefully next year.
Wonderful. That's beautiful. Okay, last question. It doesn't have to be your favorite, just one that you love. Tell me a joke.
Ah, oh my God. Well, I like really rotten, horrible jokes,
That's all right.
like like Michael Jackson jokes. I thought, were so horrible and so twisted, but they would make me laugh. So like, there's all the typical Michael Jackson jokes. I don't know. How do you know it's bedtime at the Neverland Ranch when the big hand touches the little hand? All that sort of stuff. But but the one that is so rotten is why did Michael oh, this is horrible. I'm gonna get canceled for saying this. Um, that That's the kind of, now this is, I'm giving you an insight into
Yeah,
drag queen dressing room jokes. These aren't jokes that I'm going to tell on
yeah.
stage
No, I
anytime
get
soon, but amongst comedians, we actually like rotten, horrible, wrong jokes.
I,
So the wronger it is, as long as it's not mean or racist, you know what I mean? Then, yeah, I guess essentially that joke is, yeah, it's about something serious, but it's so ludicrous that it's
yeah,
funny.
yeah. That's what Aristocrats is all about. So
That I love that documentary. I
yeah.
think that's one of the documentaries where I was like, it's really true. Drag queens. I mean, whether you're the comedy comedy professional who does stand up, or you're a drag performer, or you're a radio DJ who does comedy, whatever. I do think that those things are pretty interconnected. We all, behind the scenes, we all like really rotten shit. We're dark people.
Well, it was wonderful talking with you, Joshua. Thank you so
You
much
too.
for sharing this insight into you and into Peaches with me. And we will talk again very soon.
All right, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.